Hey everyone, David Aragona and Craig Milkowski here to take a look at one of two Grade 1 events on Saturday at Belmont Park. This is Race 7, the Grade 1 Belmont Oaks Invitational, going 1.25 miles on the inner turf course for the 3-year-old fillies. And Craig, this is a pretty interesting race. Both of these Grade 1 turf affairs on Saturday at Belmont came up with wide open fields. This one evenly split between the Europeans and Americans, 5 of each in this affair, and many runners to consider.
Yeah, these are always fun races for me. These are good races for our partnership with Timeform overseas. We really get to put it to use. They do some great comments in our past performances. I use their ratings as well. So I always look forward to these every year. And I think this year is a little more competitive than what we've seen, especially last year.
Let's throw up the field for this race. 10 runners signed on, made the morning line favorite, the number 10 Concert Hall, one of those European shippers, all the way on the outside. It'll be interesting to see how the public bets the 3 Chad Brown runners in this race. He has the number 1 McCoolick, the number 3 Haughty, and the number 5 Consumer Spending, all runners with credentials to be effective in this race. Craig, many horses to consider, but it does feel like that number 10 Concert Hall comes in with some pretty strong class lines.
Yeah, I was going to say it might sound funny talking about class from the guy that makes all the speed figures, but she does seem to have a pretty pronounced class edge. And part of that is they run a lot more Group 1s overseas this time of year for 3-year-olds than what we see here. Kind of just getting kick-started here in the States at this level.
Now, Craig, there's no pace projector for this race since the field is evenly split with only 5 of the runners being American-based. We don't have pace figures for the European runners, so we don't like to project a pace situation in that scenario. So we'll see how this shakes out on the front end, but it does feel like a couple of the Euros do have speed, the number 7 Hot Queen and the number 9 Agartha.
Yeah, for sure. Especially Hot Queen. She seems like one who's determined to get to the front end. And just to echo what you said, we don't want to paint a false picture with the pace projector, maybe showing just the Americans and we have a horse on a lone lead when that's probably not really going to be the case.
Let's start by going through some of the American contingent, beginning with that Chad Brown trio. And we'll begin with the number 3 Haughty, and we'll take a look at her last race when she won the Penn Oaks at Penn National. This was her first race off a lengthy layoff since she had finished 3rd in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies Turf at the end of last year. Craig, hard to really know what to make of this race, though, because she wasn't facing much competition, and the turf course was much softer than what she's going to find at Belmont on Saturday.
Yeah, of the Chad Brown runners, I think she's the one that's the biggest unknown, even though she's won 3 out of her 4 starts, had a really nice showing at the end of her 2-year-old year in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies Turf when she was beaten less than a length. But as you said, she's only raced once as a 3-year-old. We did give it a speed figure over that bog course at Penn National, but who knows what to make of it. The course at Belmont has been the just complete opposite, as firm as you will find a turf course. So for me, she is the biggest question mark. I do view her as a contender, but it's a pretty big step up to go from that mile race to 1.25 miles in just her 2nd start.
Yeah, like all of the Americans, she'll be trying this 1.25 mile distance for the first time. We'll see how she handles it as a daughter of Empire Maker. Another runner that Chad Brown has in this race is the number 5 Consumer Spending. We'll take a look at her winning the local prep for this, the Grade 2 Wonder again at Belmont towards the beginning of June. And Craig, she feels like one that's really taken a step forward since returning as a 3-year-old. She was okay as a juvenile, finishing behind Haughty actually in that Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies Turf, but her 2 races as a 3-year-old have been better than anything she produced last year.
Yeah, she's progressed nicely. She's run some really good speed figures in her efforts, 112 and a 115 last time out, I believe, in the race that we're watching. And she's done it without the benefit of much pace in either of those races. The last time out in that Grade 2 Wonder again, it was a little hot early, kind of slowed in the middle, and she still was able to finish it off well. So of the Chad Brown, she's the one I'm personally most confident in, as she has the speed figures that can compete with the Europeans.
Yeah, she signaled she had taken a big step forward in her return when actually turning the tables on Breeders' Cup winner Pizza Bianca in that Memories of Silver. We'll see how she handles the stretch out in distance as a daughter of More Than Ready, but she is definitely one that would appreciate some pace if it does develop up front. Another horse who could fall into that category, trying to come from off the pace, is the number 1 McCoolick. Let's take a look at her all the way back when she won her debut at Saratoga last summer in August. And I wanted to go back to this race, Craig, because she's actually defeating Consumer Spending, who's also in this race, the one that we just talked about. This remains the only victory on McCoolick's resume, but I think that she's run deceptively well in some races since then.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought that race up, but I think it's probably a good one. And that might be the race that we saw the most fair trip that she's had. Her last couple came over that Churchill Downs turf course that's been kind of shaky, to say the least. They obviously canceled racing on it for the season. And we just saw some kind of crazy results there. So I don't take a whole lot of stock in what we saw. And she's run well. She was only beaten a couple lengths both times with good speed figures. I'm just not sure what to make of her in the stretch out to 10 furlongs.
Yeah, she's definitely a wild card in here since she only has that one victory to her name. But I thought she ran deceptively well in that Edgewood when she was riding the inside most of the way before angling out in the stretch when New Year's Eve got the jump on her. And then last time, I think the winner of that race, Walkathon, is pretty good. And there wasn't a whole lot of movement going on in the stretch of that race in terms of horses closing. And she made a determined run down the center of the turf course to get pretty close to Walkathon, closer than it looked like she could get at the top of the stretch. And as a daughter of Frankel, I'm not that concerned about her stretching out to the 10 furlongs here. New Year's Eve is the horse that actually defeated McCoolick 2 back in the Edgewood, and she ran very well that day, Craig. I think you just have to ask yourself, where did that performance come from? And maybe was it a product of that quirky Churchill Downs turf course?
Yeah, she has had some trips coming into that race, and so the big jump in the speed figures isn't a huge concern for me. But she did have a pretty good pace set up that day. She was on the best part of the track, so I do prefer a couple of the Chad Browns to her among the American horses.
Yeah, I think my biggest concern with her is her running style. She just comes from so far back. It seems like she has to drop back to last in her races, so she could be left with a lot of ground to make up. But as a daughter of Kitten's Joy, she's not supposed to mind this stretch out to the 1.25 mile distance. The one other American that we should mention is actually a California shipper. That's the number 2, Cairo Memories. Let's take a look at her when she won the Honeymoon as her prep for this race last time out. And she only won by 1.25 this day, Craig, but she was a much easier winner than the margin would indicate. As you could see, Mike Smith not really setting her down until the very late stages of this race. I just kind of question the competition that she's been facing out west.
For sure, that's my concern as well. Her speed figures are actually pretty decent, but she has been beating up on horses that just aren't very good in California. It's when you look through the Timeform US charts, you don't see a lot of accolades coming from those behind her those days. So I guess some might view her as a contender, but this just seems like much too big a step for me.
Let's move over to some of the European contenders, and we'll talk about that morning line favorite, the number 10 Concert Hall. I want to show a good portion of her last race in the Pretty Polly Stakes over at the Curragh in Ireland. She is the horse in those purple and white silks kind of in behind runners. And I just want people to take note of the trip that she gets here. She's starting to launch her run, but she's going to get squeezed between horses right here and actually shuffled all the way back to last with just over 1/4 mile to go in this race. And she's going to have to swing to the outside. And I think actually does pretty well to get back on track and beat half the field in this race, because keep in mind, she was facing older Group 1 rivals here. Now she's dropping back in to face 3-year-olds. And Craig, it just feels like this is actually a drop in class for her.
Yeah, it's a huge drop in class. I think it's just a lot tougher competition over there. And for me, she is the horse to beat in that field. I mean, she wasn't embarrassed in that performance at all. Her Timeform ratings stack up nicely. And it just seems like she has the field over the barrel a little bit class-wise. As far as the post position, I do have a little bit of concern about that. But at the 1.25 mile distance, it's only a slight one.
Yeah, her form lines just really hold up to scrutiny. She was a good 4th in the Epsom Oaks 2 back behind Emily Upjohn, who a lot of people consider to be the best 3-year-old filly in Europe, and Nashwa, who went on to win the French Oaks in her next start. Even that horse that she beat by a nose in her seasonal debut, the Salsabil 4 back, Magical Lagoon, came back at Royal Ascot and won the Group 2 Ribblesdale. So just rock solid form lines for Concert Hall. And we should mention Aidan O'Brien. He's had success in this race before, and he's used the Pretty Polly especially as a prep for his Belmont Oaks winners, Athena and Santa Barbara last year. So Concert Hall definitely has history in her favor trying to win this again for trainer Aidan O'Brien. Another European shipper is the number 4 With the Moonlight. And Craig, I think we have to respect this filly just because of the connections in her corner. Sure, she ran a big time form rating 2 back, but disappointed last time in the Kazoo Oaks.
Yeah, it was at 1.5 miles, and the course maybe didn't suit her that well. And it's impossible for me to throw out a Charlie Appleby horse after what he did last year. I'm going to rely on that race 2 back and think that she's well met in here and going to run a pretty big one when she got that 106 time form rating.
Yeah, speaking of Charlie Appleby, let's throw up our DRF formulator fact for him. Over the past 5 years in Grade 1 stakes in North America, he's winning at nearly a 50% rate with a very healthy ROI. So dismiss his runners at your own risk. He's done very well, especially in the last couple of seasons where I think his win rate is actually north of 50%. One more European that we should mention is the number 9 Agartha, going out for Joseph O'Brien. He sprung an upset in the States before, actually did so last year with State of Rest in the Saratoga Derby, who went off at, I believe, 21-1 that day, also ridden by John Velasquez. Though this filly, if she pulls off an upset here, is going to have to handle the stretch out in distance.
Yeah, she's never been further than a mile, but I did look at a race 3 back where she was beaten just a length by Homeless Songs, a filly who came back to win the Irish 1,000 Guineas, the race that Agartha was in last time and didn't run to her form, but she has time form ratings similar to the others. So if she handles a stretch out, I expect her to be a factor.
Craig, let's throw up our top picks for this race. And as I can see from your selections, you lean towards the Europeans here, and I really can't blame you. It seems like they come in with some pretty strong form lines.
Yeah, and especially Concert Hall, who just facing older last time, something we would never see here in the States in a Grade 1, a 3-year-old on turf facing the older in June. It just wouldn't happen. So maybe her form's a little bit dirtied up by doing that. But as you pointed out, and as we saw in the replay, I thought she ran really well and just expect a really big race from her on Saturday.
Yeah, I have nothing against Concert Hall. I think she is much the horse to beat in this race, deserves to be the favorite. I just have an opinion about that number 1 McCoolick. I think she could appreciate the stretch out in distance and believe she's run better than the results would indicate in her 2 starts so far this season. So I'm hoping the jockey Irad Ortiz can work out a ground-saving journey for her from the rail. That's a look at the Belmont Oaks Invitational on Saturday at Belmont Park. Good luck if you're playing the races this weekend.